welcome to the Irresistible Marketing Pod, the podcast that helps you tell better stories, both in your marketing and in your self-talk. I'm your host, Isa Gauchi, your marketing confidence cheerleader and owner of the Isa Messaging digital marketing agency for service providers and personal brands with ethics and audacity. Today, we're going to talk about how to use storytelling powerfully in your marketing. Storytelling is how we make meaning out of data points. The exact same set of numbers, the exact same set of facts can be interpreted in so many different ways depending on the context of the observer, their value system, their intentions, and their life experience. Which means, regardless of your current stage of business and entrepreneurship, you have the opportunity right now to tell a magnetic story that conveys irresistible value to your most aligned buyers. Just so long as your imposter syndrome is not the author of your story. Long story short, if your about page or your sales pitch are just a bullet point list of your qualifications, you're leaving money on the table. In this episode, my guest, Shaté Hayes, founder and CEO of Career Steward, Inc., shares practical tips for taking radical ownership of your story and sharing it so powerfully it blasts open opportunities. We get into how to convey expertise ethically, how to identify the strongest parts of your story to share in your marketing, how to use data to combat your imposter syndrome, why negative self-talk can sink your messaging, how to get better stories, and how to message through a major career and identity change. Enjoy! Hello, Shaté. Welcome to the Irresistible Marketing Pod.
Hi, Isa. Thanks so much for having me.
You're most welcome. Before we dive into our juicy topic today, would you mind introducing yourself to the good people?
Absolutely. I am Shaté Hayes. I'm a creative strategist and a storyteller. I spent my first career as a professional dancer, making stories come to life on live stages. And then in my career as an ed tech leader, I embedded strategy and storytelling into the career programs that my team delivered. And now I'm a consultant through my company, Career Steward. I help creatives tell the story of their work so they can get more of it. And that looks like content and programs to help them build sustainable, thriving, independent careers.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to talk with you about storytelling today. Telling like a big, juicy story about yourself that makes people want to know more and like fully owning your awesomeness and your story. But before we get into the details, could you tell us what do you mean by storytelling?
Oh, that's a good question because I am not the type of storyteller that can imagine or who wants to, I'll say, like worlds with settings and characters and like character backgrounds. Like the idea of trying to like make up a world and tell a story about it makes me want to throw up a little bit because I don't want to do that at all. I think for me, storytelling is just like conveying a message with an arc, like a very clear beginning, middle, and end. For some people, that is some fantastic world that doesn't exist. But for me, it's like, how do you tell the story of like what actually does exist in a way that like resonates with people and makes it, stick?
Yeah, I feel like for me, I was like, that's actually kind of a hard question, but the way I answered it in my head was there's a difference between like a list of qualifications and like the story of who you are as
Yeah.
a business person and why people want to work with you. And
Yeah.
so many people struggle to get beyond just a list of bullet points. And I think it makes it a lot harder to market yourself when you are leaving it totally up to the observer to connect the dots,
Absolutely.
helping them along. So speaking of, how do you recommend people position themselves as experts through storytelling in their marketing?
Mm. That's a good question. So I know the word expert, like expertise sort of like makes some people feel weird. Maybe they're dealing with imposter syndrome and they think they don't have any, they haven't done enough. I always say like focus on the facts. That's just you're telling the story of actually what you've done. And so I've even heard people say things like, oh, their background, like I was just a insert the thing. I was just a teacher. I was just a thing, right? But there's actually some amazingly incredible things that you've done in your past experience that you deserve to tell. Like that story needs to be told. It just depends on how you tell it. So it's really focusing on what value you add, what you added in your work. Like what were the results that people got when they worked with you? What did you do for that team? Was it high performing? Did you help them be more efficient? Were you high producing? Did you handle like a huge volume of calls? Did you manage an office of like 100 people? Like think about the numbers of what you did, the data, the gains, the wins, like all of those things, and like tell the story of those things because it's the truth. It's not bragging if it's actually what you did, and you have to make it relevant to what the people you're talking to care about. So it's like telling the right story to the right audience is also part of it. So it wouldn't make sense for you to just say, oh, by the way, I wrote a book, and oh, by the way, like I worked with Beyonce, and oh, by the way, like you just listing all these really interesting things if it actually doesn't matter to the person you're trying to serve. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then I think you mentioned some in there, like the numbers are great, but I think one of the things people undersell themselves a lot on is kind of the softer skills or the softer
Mm-hmm.
results.
Mm-hmm.
Where that are so important. Like I think about it in like a medical setting, like did you have
Yeah.
a way to put patients at ease when they had to have
Mm-hmm.
scary news? Like that is so worth saying as your part of your skill set and what you bring to the table that you might not necessarily have like I have a hard data answer
Yeah.
to this for sure. Do you have any advice around that?
Oh, that's so lovely. I love how you said that. I think it's sort of calling it out. Is there a trend around it? So it's still sort of like leaning towards data. Like, how would one know that they did that unless someone told them, unless it came up in an assessment of some sort, unless you just have the amount of self-awareness to know that that's what you picked out every single time in your client. So there still is sort of like a measurable aspect of it in that like did it continue to happen, did people continue to experience it, did people continue to recognize it? And I think you're right, like you should absolutely be able to tell those stories, but there is sort of an element of awareness that has to be there in order for the story to be told. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think like it counts as data if you're like, wow, this other doctor I work with, I noticed they'd really put the patient on edge, and then I was always able to calm them down.
Yes.
Even if it's your
Yes.
own data, I think
Yes.
it
I
counts.
totally agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, awesome. So I work with primarily newer entrepreneurs, and
Mhm.
the storytelling about like ethically presenting yourself as an expert in ways that you actually are an expert without underselling yourself, but also like acknowledging the limitations is something people really struggle with. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people are like, well, I can't say anything if I don't have like unattainable level of qualifications.
Yeah.
Or they feel like they need to oversell themselves and claim expertise they don't have. So, do you have any guidance for us on not underselling yourself, but also being okay with acknowledging the limitations of your expertise and experience?
Yeah, I think it's an definitely a delicate dance. I take the approach similar to like how you would perform in like a job interview, for example. So when they're sort of asking you all these like tell me about the time you've right X, Y, and Z, and even if you haven't done it, you say you redirect to what you have done in a way that's relevant to what the person wants to hear. So it's really literally, I think, all about redirection. And so when it comes to early entrepreneurs, I know a lot of folks feel like, well, I'm trying to sell this thing and I don't necessarily have the clients that I can speak towards those results. You can approach that one in one of two ways. That's either like offer to do the thing for free so you can get some social proof, or pull from your results from your like corporate career or whatever you did before this business and like tell the story of that. And then sort of redirect in an honest way. Like, I'm trying to imagine a world where the limitations would come up, because hopefully the people are coming to you for what you have to offer, for what you can do. But if limitations do come up, maybe you can solve that by sort of having people you collaborate with that does solve this gap that you don't have, or so just redirect to how you can solve the problem is what I'm trying to get at, whether that be through collaborations, whether that be through like, well, this is the part of the process that I'm actually an expert in, and if you actually really need this other part of the process, maybe sometimes it's like, maybe there's a different person that's better for you. But I think it's a game of like redirection and like being honest about what you can do, and just being able to tell the story in a way that just really really shows the value that you have. Does that I feel like I just said a whole bunch of words.
Oh, that makes sense. I think it's kind of pick me to be like, I can do that. I can do anything you want, you know?
Yeah.
It kind of gives that pick me vibe. Whereas, like, this is what I'm an expert in. I actually don't do that. Shows confidence in that what you have to offer is enough and is
Yeah.
desirable enough on its own and
Hmm.
should be valued in just what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think.
everyone's not the right client for you, because if you go out of your way trying to solve everything for that one person, like chances are they're not ever really gonna feel satisfied anyways, and then you're gonna feel resentful and burnt out and just like icky about it all. So like, yeah, like make sure that you're supporting the people who really want what you have, what you can do, you know?
Yeah, it's so important that any like client or job relationship be win-win.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. I imagine as someone who helps people with their careers and career transitions a lot, this is something you work with people on a lot.
Yeah.
How if if when someone sits down to like write their about page or like figure out what to say in that like first sales call about themselves and they're immediately seized by imposter syndrome, do you have
Mhm.
any tips for how they we kind of can kind of reorient into a more empowered, confident posture?
Yeah, I mean, it literally is facts over feelings. Like feelings aren't your feelings are valid, right? I can understand them. We all grapple with imposter syndrome. I don't know any human being who hasn't. And so validate that, that feeling, that is it's you're human, and so it's a thing. And really focusing on the facts of the situation. Like the fact of the situation is you probably are very qualified to solve this problem based on the evidence that you've done it before in some capacity. And so you focus on what you have done, because that is the actual truth. Like you did, you had a career doing this thing and you solved these types of problems for these types of people, and these were like either the recognition that you got for it, or maybe you were promoted, or like there is something that is innately you that is the truth and that is worthy of being shared. And so focus on that and not the feeling that's trying to like tell you that you're not enough.
I like that, like using the facts of your actual experience as kind of a grounding. Like, no,
Mhm,
wait, I actually
mhm.
did that. I literally.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Awesome. How much of your personal story do you recommend people allow into their marketing?
I think I'm a fan of it, but in a way that is not I'm not an oversharey kind of person. I'm actually pretty private and I'm an introvert. And so I think that there is some value in being vulnerable and like courageous in that vulnerability, but it doesn't have to be like the dirty details of everything that you went through. Like what's the thing? I'm forgetting the saying. Like you can share like what, but not necessarily how, or something, with some version of that, right? Where I can tell you like, oh my gosh, this week I went through this really, really tough challenge with a family member. We had a disagreement and da da da. Move on to the thing. The same way that you would package up, right, a star story, like or a par card. You set up the situation, the action, and the result, and then you bridge it to the thing that you're trying to communicate to your clients. I think that's really important because it helps people to relate to you and to get to know you better. And then on that spectrum of like know, like, trust, that's how you get them closer to the know, like, trust, so that they can, work with you. And so I think it's important to share some things, but maybe not the super, super nitty gritty details of all things.
Yeah, like maybe the stuff you worked through enough to not
Exactly.
feel like it's like a bloody open wound.
Exactly.
But I think the point you made about being willing to have some vulnerability in your storytelling and messaging is important because it
Yeah,
makes you human and people relate to other humans. Like whether you're an
exactly.
entrepreneur or trying to get a job, like people are going to be imagining what, especially for my audience, who's primarily like creatives and one-on-one service offers or leaders of memberships, like they're
Yeah,
actually going to be spending time with you as a human. So it's really important that your marketing includes your humanity in it, which by nature of being human includes some vulnerability for sure.
exactly. Yeah, I think it's
Especially,
important that they know you. Yeah, go ahead.
especially if you're asking clients to be vulnerable with you, I think as well.
That's a really good point. Yeah, if you're doing any type of coaching or anything like that, like if you want those folks to open up to you, you've got to open up a little too as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, if you have any advice for folks that are leaving a corporate role to go into business for themselves and
Mm-hmm.
they find themselves kind of stuck in the old voice and tone and storytelling postures of what was allowed in their past environments, and now they have a personal brand. They have to show up very authentically, and they're struggling to kind of like shift the way they speak after being conditioned so long for one version of professionalism. What do you tell
Mm-hmm.
those folks?
That's a question that I think hasn't come up. I will tell you what has come up. I'll answer your question, but there are definitely folks I've encountered, myself included, who like have been like leaders in their corporate space and they're used to having a team to work with, and then all of a sudden you're building a business on your own and like there there is no one else and you have to do all this, like sort of very detailed in the weeds work, and that is very tricky. In terms of the voice, the first thing that comes to mind for me is like usually when we're in corporate settings, we're used to speaking in like the brand, the tone, the voice, the culture, the way of that entity, that business had its own identity, its own way of being. And so you're sort of like in that world. Whereas when you're building your own thing, you really have to discover what your voice identity, brand is. For a lot of folks, it's just an extension of who they are personally. And so hopefully it's not that much of a reach to sort of present who you actually are. So for example, with me, when I'm doing a ton of like blog posts or anything, I want to be credible and professional, but with a little bit of humor. So I want it to feel like you're hearing from a girlfriend and not, a coach who's a girlfriend, and not some sort of stuffy, who is this person? They're too smart to relate to kind of vibe. And that's how I am in my everyday life. I like to feel I'm pretty down to earth and authentic. And I want to, sort of have this vibe where everyone that I meet could be a neighbor. And so it's just an extension of who I am. And so I would say the first thing was probably like, what's the awareness around who you are? How would you want to show up in the world? And then can you communicate that way?
Yes, such a good point. I think this is why I love messaging frameworks and like brand kits, even if you're like a solopreneur or
Mhm.
um like a team of like two. I love
Yeah.
it for that reason because then you like when you kind of remove yourself from the immediate, you get to think about the big picture. Like, how do I want to come across? Like,
Hmm.
I want it to have like a good neighbor vibe. Like, I'm not a stuffy professional. You would
Hmm.
feel comfortable talking to me about this stuff for over happy hour or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that like you obviously have put thought into this, and it would be hard to come up with like what is my brand in the moment while you're doing it. And so I think it's important to either have documents or at least strategizing time when you're like, what
Mhm.
do I want to convey? What do I want to present big picture? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from your own story, you have quite a history as a dancer, as a
Mhm.
choreographer, and then made a big career transition. Um, for however much you're comfortable sharing, was that a challenge to update your self concept when you switched roles? And do you have advice for anyone else making a transition like that?
Oh yeah, it was 1000% difficult because I went through a full-on like identity crisis. Like, who am I if I'm not dancing? And it's interesting because I wasn't forced out of the career. I chose to move on to something else. I was like, oh yeah, I'm ready to transition. I'm gonna be something else. I didn't know what I was transitioning to, but I had already started to do this sort of helping dancers build their careers, their freelance careers. And so I just started, doing more of that. But I remember just like literally not wanting to leave the house because I was like, I'm a dancer and now I'm not a dancer. And like, like, how do I present myself? What do I say about myself? Are people going to get me? Do I get me? Like, it's just like all kinds of mind crap that was in the way. But what really helped me, and to be honest, it took me a while, sort of in hindsight, wish I had done some of this work before I transitioned fully. When I finally got clear around what parts of my work I wanted to continue doing is when I really started to like make the most progress in the transition. But my last work before I transitioned, I was an educator. I was a adjunct dance professor in a number of college campuses in the Dallas area, and then I was also choreographing a ton of theater. And so when I transitioned, I was like, okay, I really do like what I'm doing career wise in terms of like helping others figure out their paths. I really do like being connected to higher ed. I really do um, like there were a couple of other things I was like, these are my values, my top priorities when continuing the work right now. And then I did the work of telling that story. So I took the elements of my dance career background that were most relevant to where I was headed. And I only focused my story on those things. So I could not have transitioned saying, oh, I've taught so much like tap and jazz and hip hop and to all ages. And then I choreographed Hairspray. I couldn't have told that story was not important to where I was headed. So I had to focus on how many dancers I had coached and mentored, and like what my sort of classroom management and curriculum development was like, and like sort of how I guided people through like a learning process and like a transformation of their own and their career paths. I had to tell that story, and it took me a while to get there because I couldn't see it initially after I got up over the shock of like the fact that I wasn't dancing anymore. But when I finally did, it's just literally just pulling, again, redirection, pulling those parts out of your story to tell to the folks that you're talking to at the moment, right?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful example. I think we don't let ourselves grieve enough. Like when,
Mhm.
like when even when it's like it was your choice to
Yeah.
transition, but to like close a big chapter like that in a big way, part of recognizing yourself and to kind of jump into the unknown, especially if you've been doing this one thing your whole life and then you're like, I'm doing something different. It's scary. You're like, I remember when I stopped being a journalist, I was like, do I need to introduce myself to
Yeah,
figure
I
out
know.
my voice need to be different? How does a not journalist walk? Is it weird that I sit in coffee shops by myself so much now? Like,
No, that's so real, Issa. And not just yourself. I don't know why more people weren't talking about this. There's so much mind stuff. Since we're
yeah,
going down this path, it was like, okay, not only do I not know who I am, it's like, oh, is there something wrong with me? Because my parents have done the same career for decades. And like here I am changing careers. Like, am I flaky? And then it's like the people around you are like, so wait, you're not a dancer anymore? Like, are you dancing? Like what? You're not gonna, like so they didn't get it. People still associate me with dance because I still dance. I'm gonna always dance. But like the people around me even had to be like, wait, so who are you? What are you doing now? And to like try to talk about that when you don't even quite know yet, it's just like it's so it's just such a really icky, yeah, experience. And
yeah.
I wish I had had the language of I needed to allow the grieving of this part of me that was such a huge part of me, and I think that people should anticipate sort of some of that grief as they're changing like really hugely.
Yeah, I also think that's so real about people being confused on how to relate to you now, because
Mm-hmm.
humans are just so hardwired to clock anything unfamiliar as a like potentially dangerous or uncomfortable or a threat because like
Yeah.
our lizard brain is like, well, I only know I can survive what I already have. So anything new, even if it's like a good new, is scary. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're experiencing that, folks listening, it's normal. It's okay. Like it's okay. People will learn to relate to you in a new way, or those relationships can transition out. But it's normal if you're going through a big identity change, and like
Yeah.
especially if you're like, I've been an employee my whole life, and now I'm just like I'm my own boss now. Everyone, that's gonna freak a lot of people out, just to be real.
Yeah. Yeah. That's gonna make them uncomfortable because it's like, oh snap, you don't know where your paycheck's coming from, and like for whatever reason, it sort of makes them anxious. And then yeah, like try to observe and not absorb other people's fear and anxiety because it's definitely a thing. You gotta like choose who you share your dreams with for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, when you're looking at folks marketing and you realize they could be telling this story better, is there any telltale signs where you're like, oh, we gotta fix that, that you might?
Mhm. Yeah, usually for me because it's like on a sort of I don't want to say career angle because it's when I say career, I just mean body of work, creatives who are building something independently, freelancing, consulting. But usually I can spot, even if it is a traditional career, what's not working by the opportunity blocks. Meaning, like, if I hear someone say, I just take the traditional career route, for example. I have submitted a gazillion resumes. I'm not getting any bites. I'm like, oh, there's something wrong with your story. Or
Mm,
someone trying to get like freelancer, independent work. Like I keep sending all these people to my website, or I keep showing them insert whatever the thing is, and like nothing's happening. Or I'm on all these calls and there are no bites. I'm like, you're this something's wrong with the story. Those are clear signs that like whenever there's a block like that, and people are just clearly not getting you, then there's usually an issue with the story. What do you
gotcha.
think?
Yeah, I think so too. I think some of it's hard to explain technically because some of it's really just vibes. I think particularly
Mm,
if you're like a consultant, a coach, or someone, people are trusting your expertise. One of the things I think that's hard to quantify in this story is just like lack of confidence and belief in your value and ability to do it, even if you have every qualification. But I think it's really hard to ask other people to believe something that you don't believe yourself.
exactly. Exactly.
And the way you speak to and about yourself is so indicative of your self-concept, your level of confidence, um, and how willing other people are going to be to trust you based on the like overt and kind of, I don't know, like subconscious signals you're sending and how you describe yourself and
Mm-hmm.
the value of your work for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like whatever you feel, they're gonna feel too. So even if you're saying all the right things, if there's like an essence and energy of like they're gonna feel that yeah, and like that opportunity likely won't move forward.
Yeah, so yeah, I wonder, do you want to chat a little bit about, so maybe that's you. You're listening and you're like, I feel called out. Ouch. My feelings are a little bit hurt right now. Uh, just so these folks don't lose hope. Do you have any advice for how do we start building up that confidence? How do we start building up the belief to tell a real good story about to make something of our experiences, even the painful ones, to be
Yeah.
part of how we present ourselves in a beautiful way?
Yeah, it's I'm sitting here translating the question to be like, how do you like get a sense of pride in what you've done so that you can confidently speak about it? And it's something that literally so many people, literally working with a client today, grappling with the very, very same thing. And it is something around, what I've seen people deal with, coupled with what I know I've dealt with. It's like a little bit of like you haven't quite gotten that validation externally from, the workplace, your last job, client sales aren't going the way that you hoped. And so you're like, is there something wrong with me? Like there's all these sort of external ways that we sort of seek to validate ourselves, and it ends up chipping away at our confidence. And maybe we haven't seen the value in our work ourselves, but I'm trying to avoid saying a very what feels like a cliche response, but we really do have to find a way to have the validation start from within us and not externally. And I don't know if there's like an easy way. I can say something I've said before in terms of focus on the facts, but if you're focusing on the facts and you're still like not quite believing them, then the only other thing I would recommend is like approaches that I have done for myself in my own life. And that includes things like therapy, journaling, meditation, right? Like just to change, to your point, what you say to yourself, that story that you tell yourself is so much more important than any other story that you tell. So if you're telling yourself that I don't have enough experience, no one's ever going to buy from me, they're not going to get it, I don't fully get it. If you're replaying that self-talk over and over and over and over, that's what's going to come out. And so you've got to put new things in. You've got to reframe those thoughts. You've got to like disrupt them, and you've got to tell new ones, right? Tell a new story to yourself so that you can be projecting sort of that confidence that you need to build the life that you want, you know?
100%. I'm so like there's so much good stuff in there. And I actually think like the way you said, like, look at the data is part of what I tell my clients a lot. Like, let's give a list, let's brain dump a list of why
Mhm.
you are the perfect person to solve this problem for these
Yeah,
particular people. And then record it as a voice note to yourself or read it. Just
that's a
like
good idea.
practice and repetition so that that becomes a new thought and your new go-to and your new, oh, that's my new default story about myself. And you can literally use data for that. But I think the point is just the practice and repetition of that's your new story for other
Mhm.
people and in your marketing, but also for yourself so that you're not asking them to believe something you don't.
Yeah.
But also I'm glad you mentioned therapy. Like I say like I know prices and stuff and healthcare is can be inaccessible, but I really feel like every entrepreneur should be in therapy because we're challenging ourselves in unusual ways. Um,
Yes.
yes, this is, as you can tell from our conversation just about storytelling and marketing, this is very confronting. Like how we integrate everything that happened before? How do we feel like enough? And then make other or get not make them, but invite other people to trust us because we trust ourselves. This is very businessy, right? Or the out
Yeah.
is very businessy and technical and professional. But like the inner work to be able to do that is very personal. It's very
My
shadow.
goodness. It is literally one of the most courageous, scary acts that someone could do because you're literally monetizing like who you are in some way. And that is just like an artist, right? Like you're putting your art, this thing that was so intimate to you, out for people to experience, consume, judge, right, criticize. Same thing with the business. Like you're pouring your heart and soul into like this thing you're trying to build, and like early on, are people going to get it, or they're not buying, or maybe I did this wrong, and all the testing and iterating and testing and iterating is just like, yes. So if you don't have the resources for it, like find an accountability buddy who's also building a business, just someone that you could just vent to and they'll understand what the heck that you're going through. I have several of those, by the way, and a therapist. And so, and a coach. So any way I can externally process and get it out, I'm just like, I got to talk to somebody because this is annoying and very hard, but also extremely rewarding.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. I too, I have two or three mentors right now, a therapist, and then I'm in someone's membership, and then I have a membership for my clients.
Exactly.
So like you're doing something that's kind of out there. Let's be
Hmm.
real. Not everybody's gonna like go cave diving into the unknown that is entrepreneurship, and a lot of people aren't going to get it. A lot of people are going to still try to relate to you like a past version of you that you are evolving out
Yep.
of, and it's rewarding, but like you need so much positive reinforcement, you need so much support, you need so much new stories to tell yourself, especially if old stories you're telling yourself are like holding you back from getting you what you want. So I'm so glad you brought up that support being really important for this.
It's like literally critical. I've tried in that space when I was transitioning from being a dancer to like my corporate career and career development. I was already building this blog called The Working Dancer, and that's where I was like doing all of this writing and sort of content production around how to build these careers. And I did it in a vacuum. So I was just like so afraid of being seen, probably because I was still like walking through the grief of not being a professional in the same way. And so I think there's a lot of complicated, like emotional and mental stuff going on. So it kept me, I sort of built all this stuff in isolation. I was just like creating content and then I just like publish it. And like that was it. I wasn't like building relationships and I was growing a list because the content was valuable, but I could have done so much more with it if I had like partnered with people and like gotten out into the community in the same way that I was in my dance career or, like it just sort of it served the purpose that it was supposed to. And I recognize now on this side of things that how much I was just like by myself. And so, yeah, I just couldn't sustain it because I was just alone with my own thoughts and my own insecurities. So, like not really doing it in partnership with other people and community with other people.
Yeah, I want to give like past isolated you a hug right now. Through the screen and
Yeah.
in space. But yeah, something else that occurs to me, speaking of stories, is if you've been like stuck in one identity or one way of storytelling about yourself and your work and stuff for a long time, it can sometimes be really hard to even imagine other stories you could tell yourself or other perspectives. Like, I think I
Mhm.
just recently sent out an email to my newsletter list about how my business coach like made my head explode in the best way by saying she likes making heads explode at like networking events by saying she does not value productivity. And I just when she first said that jaw on the floor, I was like, what? You do that and like make money? Like productivity doesn't have to be a value. Like that never would have occurred to me that that could be there could be a way of doing work in entrepreneurship and making money where the goal isn't just to do as much stuff as possible. And
Yeah.
so I'm so grateful I was exposed to these other ideas I could choose from to see what worked for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, yeah, I spent so much time early on, speaking of like younger isolated me, and maybe a little bit after her too, like looking for someone to show me the way, like paying all this money to like, can someone just show me the way to build this business that I want so I can have this lifestyle that I want and make the impact that I want. And I'm just learning in this season and this iteration of my career, my own business, that there is no one way. Like there are an infinite number of ways. And the way that will work for you is the one that resonates with who you are as a human being. And so to your point, like that's what works for the person that you are introduced to. But now I'm like trying to explore, whoa, what are the ways that actually feel best to me? And like what do I want to do? Because what's really important is like you have to do it in a way that works for you so that you can sustain the hard moments. Like when you don't feel like doing it, it has to be something that resonates with you. Otherwise, if you're doing all these ways that work for other people, but not necessarily you, you're more likely to quit. You're more likely to like burn out faster and just, not continue on this idea that you had to begin with. So there's like an infinite, like I said before, number of ways to make happen whatever idea you have.
You're so right. And I think it's Chani Nicholas if there's any other astrology girlies listening, but she often says, take what works for you and leave the rest.
Yep.
Like, yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
And the stories that work for you, and you don't have to take on the ones that don't.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Shate, thank you so much for sharing so much insight and wisdom for the good people listening. How can people follow you and work with you?
Yeah. I mean, thanks so much for having me, Issa. Like, I love talking about, especially the part about the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And speaking of that, I've got a really, really powerful resource called the Multi Hyphenates Manifesto. For those of us who have like this unrelated background, we've done a lot of transitioning, like I have, to be honest, and you're trying to figure out, like, what the hell am I telling people? Like, how do I make sense of the past 20 years of my career? How do I, like claim independence from like the boxes that other people try to put me in? And like, how do I literally package something that people will understand and will move me forward? Then that's exactly what my multi hyphenates manifesto tool is. It'll help you kind of work through some of that reflection. You can find that at lightmycareermatch.com.
Awesome. And I will have links for this stuff and how to follow Shaté on the interwebs in the show notes for this episode.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Shaté.
Thanks, Issa.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please check the show notes for how to follow and work with Shaté and myself. And don't forget to drop us 5 stars and a positive review on your way out. We'd love to hear your feedback. XOXO, Issa out.